Okay. Say what you just said again.
Okay, so I just think it's important for readers to know that I struggle with pretty severe imposter syndrome when it comes to writing. And I can usually overcome that if the writing is somewhat sterile in terms of like my role. Like if I'm writing a case study that's about other people, I can push myself through it under the guise that no one's sort of attacking me through writing correction, if this makes sense at all. But in an autoethnography where you both are the writer and the subject, it's such a vulnerable place to be that I think without open review, I would not have been able to handle any feedback, right? Like any sort of suggestion that, maybe this paragraph would be better in this other section would feel too much like an attack on me as an individual, not just me as a writer. I lived so much of my academic life in the math world where writing is supposed to be terse. You do not absolutely ever over explain yourself. That doesn't make a proof beautiful, right? A proof is beautiful if it's got the fewest possible number of steps. And so to switch from that to the education world, where it's basically like tell the reader, tell the reader, tell the reader again, it was really, really difficult for me. And, like I said, I just have some really extreme imposter syndrome that I think it would have made this project impossible for me to overcome the mental gymnastics if we wouldn't have had open dialogue about things that need to change. What am I trying to say with these pictures? What's the theme of this section? That would have all felt really, really cold without a discussion with the reviewer.
Yeah. And that's a really good point. I mean, my view is that like education is dangerous business. Writing is dangerous. And the most dangerous kind of writing is autoethnography. I think that it's your story, and if it makes sense to you in this particular format, then that's what we need to stick to. So I see the role of the open reviewer in autoethnography as being one almost like a therapist who's punctuating and saying, oh, tell me more about that. The therapist doesn't try to reorganize anything, or say, the therapist never says, that thing that you just said isn't relevant. No, because the therapist knows if you said it, it's relevant to you. So we just try to unpack more and expand more. And so for me, I think that you're right on the money with that. I think it's one reason that more people don't do autoethnography, because it requires, you're basically putting yourself out there naked in the middle of the highway. It's an extremely vulnerable place to be.
Yeah.
And I'm just so honored that you wanted to bring me into that and our field into that.
Yeah, well, I think we have a strong connection through our queer identities, and I think we have quite a bit in common in our sort of country boyish identities. And it is the case that it did, like, literally I saw my therapist more while I was writing this paper than I do in a normal chunk of time, because it's super hard. Like, it's really hard to go back and revisit a youth where you felt like things were trapped, and to look at pictures and try to dig out what's a good picture that's gonna connect with a reader and connects with this particular time in my life that I'm talking about. And tons of trans people will not look at pictures of their past, because it's just, it's revisiting a life that you're transitioning away from. But I do sit in the area, in the zone of all of those things that I went through made me who I am today. And so, revisiting them and not sort of letting go of who I was in those pictures, I feel like is an important part of sort of my psychological journey, if you will. But it is the case that I wouldn't have been able to do this with just anyone. So, when you were like, hey, I've got this journal, and I was like, hey, I've got this paper that I think you might be uniquely suited for. um, because I started it with one of my advisors. So because my PhD is in STEM education, I had a science advisor and a math advisor. And my science advisor is the one who really pushed me to start writing that. He was like, someday somebody's going to want your autoethnography, you should start writing that. And I was like, no way, that is a can of worms that I am not going to open. He was like, I understand you're not ready to do it now. So right now, I want you to write a literature review that would be useful for an autoethnography, because that's more sterile. I can be removed from, I'm just reading somebody telling me how to do something that's easier to do. So he actually was the one who got me started on that path. But even as close as I was to him, it was still a topic that I just could not be that intimate with him about, because it's just too hard. And I will say, now that I know it's going to go live soon, I'm having some of those anxieties, like, oh shit, people are going to read this now. It used to just be Alex who was reading it. Now other people will read it. But I'm happy that it's going out, but it is scary.
Well, yeah. So I wrote one too.
Oh yeah.
It wasn't about, well, I guess it was sort of about math. I did get back into math in the end, but I haven't published it because I'm not brave enough to do that. So, and yet colleagues that I had read it were all colleagues in queer areas or queer adjacent area, like fields. And every single one of them told me, especially like the gay cisgendered men who read it, every single one of them told me it was the most important thing that they had ever read, and that the world needs to see it. And I'm like, well, I get that, and that's nice, a nice comment, but I just don't want to put it out there. And so the fact that you're doing this, it's an inspiration to me. And I know, from what I know that it's going to be an impactful piece for other people to read. When we're removed from our research, when we are cold researchers, the only thing that ends up leading to is more confusion, because we're not implicating ourselves in our research. And so the fact that you've written this, it's so different than what we normally think of as research. But for me, it's the only kind of research that can lead to wisdom rather than confusion. And so that's why I see it as being so valuable. And your science advisor was wise to push you in that direction. People are gonna benefit from this.
I hope so.
And that's the business that we're involved in as teachers, is other people benefiting from our effort. And that will absolutely be the case here. I just want to say that even still, when I read through this, when I was even typesetting it, the pictures, especially that first picture right at the beginning of that emergent findings chapter, And if you notice, I typeset it so that it was on the top of a brand new page,
Yeah.
because I wanted somebody to turn the page and see that with the word childhood next to it. It's an unbelievably powerful transition. And the photograph itself, all the photographs are just like, they haunt me. They haunt me. And I think that this is one of the most important ways to do not only gender research, but also transgender research. I recognize, and I can't relate to this, the whole going back to the old self. I can't relate to it, but in terms of gender, but
Yeah.
that's one of the reasons that I don't want to publish mine, is that I don't want to return back to my own childhood. And
Yeah.
it wasn't about gender, it was about a lot of other things. But, you know, I'd sort of like, I don't like who I was as a kid. I was responding to this environment that I was in, and I did it in a way that I'm not proud of now. And so it's hard to do that. But it's in that transparency and letting the reader into that intimate part of yourself that you don't like, that's where we find truth for ourselves, and it's where we're able to get beyond that and desire something new. So for me, I look at this exercise, this article, as an exercise in traversing a fantasy. And we don't, traversing a fantasy is tough to do, because we love our fantasies. They constitute, you know, they constitute how we live our days. And traversing one sort of leads to its dissolution. So for me, I see this as a therapeutic exercise for you. And I also see it as a therapeutic exercise, or a model of a therapeutic exercise for readers. And I think about all of the transgender readers that are going to read this, and it models this sort of just violent expression of the fantasy, getting it out of you, just get it out of me, you know, like a demon or something, just get it out of me. And now it's out of you.
Right.
That's how I see it.
Yeah. Do you play Zelda?
Not in 20 years or something.
It's like completing a shrine. They give you a little light.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Exercises
Yeah.
the evil, it cleanses you of the evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I suppose I've won one out of my 152 or 120 shrines, depending on which version of the game you're playing.
I think one of the things that really struck me as I was reading this and thinking about it is the important role that you place on, you know, because there's all of this rhetoric right now about how transgender people are, um, you know, indoctrinating kids, or, you know, fucking up the kids somehow. And in fact, your article shows that that is in fact the opposite case.
Right.
And so publishing anything that's this political is always risky. I'm still nervous that my dissertation is available online, because I'm sure that someday I'm going to get attacked for it from the right. But
Yeah.
if there's anybody there that can understand it, that's smart enough to understand it. But
That's the advantage you have.
yeah, I could just be totally obtuse and nobody would have any idea. So,
What does
but
this even
anyway,
mean? We don't like him, but we don't know why.
right. Yeah. I don't know what I'm saying, right? But anyway, publishing something like this is inherently a risk. But for me, that is, like I said at the beginning, education is a risky business. And if we're taking particularly mathematics education seriously, we have to see it as a risky business. And we have to lean into that and honor that potential that it gives us by being open to allowing ourselves to be changed by the process of mathematics education. You know, I see it in students every day. People who say, I'm not a math person. And then a couple of months into the semester and they're doing math and they understand it and they talk to me and they say, yeah, I feel good about it. I can't believe I did that. You know, so for me, this is a way of demonstrating how not only we have so much, it is really my contention that the only way to do gender research is through the transgender perspective, because the transgender perspective contains more truth about gender than the cisgender perspective does.
Yeah,
And
certainly, over my lifetime, I know what it's like to be treated as a woman trying to do work in STEM fields. And that will shock people sometimes at different meetings that we're at or something, and I'll say, oh yes, I know exactly what it's like to have a professor tell you that you're not going to make it as a math major because you're a woman, and women are not good at math, men are. Um, Literally coming from a man with a PhD in English language arts. It's like, okay, that's a unique point of view, fella, but there you go. But
so he really has no idea.
True, true. And so, having sat in both those spaces, and being able to say, yeah, when my name was a different name, I could say some things and some people would listen and some people would not. And now my name's Kyle and I don't say that much, but usually when I say something, everybody's listening. That's a very different lived experience. And, it's happened between the ages of, 35-ish, 40-ish to 50. So, it's not like those are memories from my 7 or 8-year-old childhood. This is a lived experience in schools and academic institutions where it's like, oh, I'm going to treat you differently now. That's real. And very few people in the world ever get to truly experience that, experience what a new group of people treat you like based on the identity that you're presenting to them versus the old group of people and the identity you presented to them. So it is a unique perspective, a hard one, but there it is.
And one of the hardest things in the world is to declare your gender. And it's a necessary thing for us to be able to articulate desire. So that's why I say that the transgender perspective is the only way to correctly think about gender, because it shows, it's not even showing the necessity of this declaration in the social order. Like I never had to do that.
Sure.
I was always the boy who wasn't masculine enough, but I was the boy, right? And so I never had to declare my gender. I was always trying to live up to the phallic demand on me.
Sure.
And the action of declaring your gender in the social order is fundamentally an existential question. And for that reason, it is incredibly hard to do. Incredibly hard to do. You don't have to declare yourself as black. Everybody knows you're black,
Right.
But if your gender is something that is not what was symbolically predetermined for you before you were old enough to even know what gender is, then it is fundamentally an existential question. And you've articulated this so well. Like I feel the universality coming through this paper, because it doesn't end
Well,
it doesn't end with any knowledge. It ends like sort of running off of a cliff and we don't know where it's heading next. And to encapsulate this radical declaration of your existence in combination with this unfinishedness, that's where I see universality emanating from this. So you have accomplished something very important and very profound in accessing universality, and much less writing an article that articulates it is a difficult task. And so you've accomplished something very, very difficult. some difficult knowledge in this article.
I would say, thank you. I appreciate that. But from my perspective, I just wrote my experience. Like, it's just what I live. And so when I hear you use big words like universality, I'm like, oh no, like, yeah, it's pretty intense.
Yeah, it's your lived experience, but that's what your experience has been. That's why
Sure.
that the transgender experience is so important to center, is that it's one that is fundamentally based on universality. And if you've never had to struggle with that, it's really hard to grasp what that is. So,
Yeah.
and the rest of the world is focused on identities, and universality is sort of against identity, because universality posits that identities are always fractured. Like we're never self-identical to these identities that we claim. And so in reading this paper and thinking about it, I see that fracturing emanate. And that's really, for me, that's the only truth about identity. And that's why this paper really captures so much truth. It is your own personal truth, but first of all, you decided to do it. And second of all, you did it, and you did it, you accomplished it. So you actually made the universal concrete in the form of this paper. It's a material intervention now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I'm really proud of, like, which I almost never say about my writing. People will go, oh, I read this thing and I thought it was great. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
it was okay. But I'm proud of this.
I'm so glad that you are, because I am too, and I'm very proud to be publishing it. And I'm proud that you wanted to do it with us.
Yeah.
So anyway, we'll see. I can't wait to hear what reactions you get from people about it.
Right. Brit Bart.
Hey, listen, we've been attacked too. The Institute's been attacked before.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's all I have to say. Thank you so much for letting me into your most intimate part of yourself with this. It's an honor.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely an honor on my end as well. It was a fabulous experience, and I'm dead serious when I say I wouldn't have done this with anyone else. It's too hard. I mean, we talked about that at the beginning, and I think it's important to circle back. It's just too vulnerable, and it's too hard to have some robot on the other end of a machine trying to tell you what you've done wrong when you're writing about your life. So the universe came together on this one.
I couldn't agree more. But this is the important type of research. This is how we pursue wisdom rather than confusion.
Yeah. All right, Alex.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was awesome. I will have this ready to go as soon as I can, as soon as I possibly can. It'll be in the next couple of days. I'll send it to you. Oh, let me stop recording this stuff.